The air in the auditorium was thick, too thick. It was a suffocating mix of expensive floral perfumes, the ozone of 100 flashing camera bulbs, and the kind of collective pride that feels like a physical weight against your chest. I remembered the exact way the wooden floorboards hummed under the weight of the standing ovation. My brother, the golden boy, the one who could do no wrong, was standing on that stage. He looked like a god in a polyester gown. My parents were beside him, their faces radiating a level of joy I had never once seen directed toward me. Then my mother stepped toward the microphone. She laughed, that light, melodic sound she uses when she's being charming, and told a joke that would end my life as I knew it. "Our son has made us so incredibly proud," she said, her voice glowing. "The second child, well, let's just say he's not exactly the standard." The room erupted. A wave of polite, cruel laughter crashed over me. In that second, the oxygen left my lungs. Have you ever felt the exact moment your presence in a room becomes an absence? I looked at my father, expecting a correction, a wink, anything. He just chuckled and looked away. Something inside me didn't just break, it went silent. I stood up, walked out of that crowded hall, and I never looked back. Looking back now, that moment at the graduation wasn't a sudden explosion. It wasn't a freak accident. It was simply the first time the truth was whispered into a microphone for everyone to hear. It was the public unveiling of a private reality I had lived in for 22 years. Growing up, my brother wasn't just a sibling. He was a monument. He was the sun, and I was a cold, distant planet lucky enough to be caught in his gravitational pull. His victories, the straight A's, the polished trophies, the prestigious scholarships, they weren't just achievements. They were the wallpaper of our home. They were the only things my parents saw when they walked through the front door. And me? I was the afterthought. I wasn't a failure by any objective measure, but in that house, if you weren't the best, you were invisible. I remember bringing home a report card with 4 A's and a B+. My mother didn't see the A's. She looked at the B+ and smiled that polite, devastating smile. "That's nice, dear," she'd say, "but why isn't it better? Your brother never had a B in his life." When I got accepted into college, my father didn't take me out to dinner. He didn't even stand up from his chair. He just nodded and said, "That's good. It's a solid safety school. Your brother, though, he got into the Ivy League." It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. There were no screams or slammed doors. It was subtle. It was constant. It was like a low-frequency hum in the background of your life that you eventually stop hearing, but it never stops vibrating in your bones. Over time, the instinct to share things, to tell them about a promotion, a dream, or a heartbreak, simply died. Why would I offer them my life when they were already full of his? My brother wasn't a villain. He never rubbed it in. He didn't have to. The very air he breathed was validated by my parents' adoration. He was the standard. I was merely the comparison. By the time we were adults, we weren't siblings. We were just two strangers who happened to share the same DNA and a very different set of rules. That graduation ceremony didn't break my spirit. It clarified my existence. It was the final piece of evidence in a trial I had been losing since birth. It showed me exactly where I stood, or rather, where I didn't. So, I made a decision that felt like a quiet suicide and a rebirth all at once. There were no dramatic speeches, no "I'll show you all" moments. I just went home, packed a single bag with everything I truly owned, and left a note on the kitchen table. It said, "I'm going to go find the version of me that isn't compared to him." I walked out of that house for what I thought was the last time. I told myself I didn't need their approval anymore. I told myself I would build something real, something mine, something that didn't require their permission to exist. But here's the thing about silence. It cuts both ways. Days turned into weeks. Weeks melted into months. I waited for the phone to ring. I waited for the "where are you" text. I waited for the "we're sorry" email. Nothing. The silence was absolute. It was a vacuum. And the truth, the cold, hard, terrifying truth, was that it didn't surprise me. They didn't come looking because they weren't missing anything. I had simply faded out of their story like a character who was no longer necessary for the plot. I had spent my whole life feeling invisible, and now I finally was. The first year on my own was a masterclass in survival. I moved into a tiny studio apartment on the edge of the city. The paint was peeling in long jaundiced strips, and the heater made a sound like a dying animal every time it kicked on. I took the first job I could find, a grueling, soul-crushing position with long hours and pay that barely covered the rent. There were nights I sat on that cold linoleum floor eating instant noodles by the light of a flickering street lamp outside, wondering if I had made a catastrophic mistake. Loneliness makes dangerous choices feel reasonable. I considered calling them. I considered going back and begging for a seat at the table, even if it was just to catch the crumbs. But then I would remember that laughter in the auditorium. I would remember the way my father looked away, and I realized that no one was coming to save me. Strangely, that realization became my spine. It was the most liberating thought I'd ever had. If no one cared if I succeeded, then no one could define what my success looked like. I started learning, not because a teacher expected it or because my parents would brag about it, but because I was hungry. I took online courses until 3:1 a.m. I bought stained, discarded books from secondhand stores. I listened to podcasts during my hour-long bus rides to work. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tectonic plates of my life began to shift. I found a better job, then an even better one. I built routines. I built discipline. I built a version of myself that didn't have a golden child shadow hanging over it. For the first time, I wasn't chasing a ghost. I was building a person. Years passed, and the version of me that stood in that graduation hall started to feel like a character from a movie I'd seen a long time ago. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger takes energy, and I needed every drop of mine for the climb. My apartment turned into a real home. My work turned into a career. People started respecting me, not because of who I was related to, but because of what I could do. I even learned to love the quiet. There were no comparisons here. No expectations, just the steady, rhythmic sound of progress. If you've ever felt like the invisible one in the room, stay with me, because this is where the shadow finally steps into the light. By the 5th year, I had more stability than I ever imagined possible. I had a solid income, a peaceful life, and a feeling in my chest I had never felt growing up in that house. Confidence. It wasn't loud or showy. It was the steady, quiet hum of a man who knows exactly what he's worth because he's the one who paid for it. I thought I was done with them. I thought the book was closed. Then, exactly 6 years after I walked away on a random, unremarkable Tuesday evening, my phone buzzed. It was a number I hadn't seen in half a decade, but my body recognized it instantly. My heart did a slow, heavy roll in my chest. Mom. I stared at the screen for a long time. The light from the phone seemed too bright in my dimly lit living room. I opened the message. It was 4 words. Come home. Your brother has. I read it once, twice, 3 times. The sentence felt jagged, like it had been broken off mid-thought. Your brother has... What? Has succeeded? Has married? Has died? The missing words felt heavy with something unspoken, something desperate. For 6 years, there had been nothing. No birthday wishes, no holiday check-ins, no apologies for the laughter. Just a void. And now, this cryptic summons. I told myself I didn't owe them anything. I told myself that whatever was happening on the other side of that message wasn't my burden to carry. But curiosity is a cruel tether. It pulls you back even when you know the ground is unstable. An hour later, I was in my car. The drive back toward my childhood home felt like a journey through a time machine. The streets looked smaller, narrower. The houses looked tired. Everything was familiar, but it felt distant, like a place I had visited in a dream. When I pulled into the driveway, my hands tightened on the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The house looked exactly the same, but the energy around it was different. It felt quieter, older, more fragile. I walked up to the door. My heart was a drum in my ears. I knocked. My mother opened it almost immediately, as if she had been standing right behind the wood, waiting for the sound. For a long moment, we just stood there. She looked smaller. Her hair was thinner, shot through with strands of silver I didn't remember. Her eyes were red-rimmed and exhausted. She didn't say hello. She didn't say she was sorry for the 6 years of silence. She didn't even ask where I'd been. You came, she said softly. I stepped inside, and the air hit me like a physical blow. It was heavy with the smell of old dust and unwashed dishes. My father was sitting in the living room, his eyes fixed on the floor rather than the television. He didn't stand up when I walked in. He didn't offer a smile. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out from the inside. And then I saw my brother. He was sitting on the couch. The same brother who had stood on that stage looking like a prince, but the prince was gone. He was pale, his shoulders were slumped, and his hands were shaking. He looked like a ghost of the person I used to envy. We need your help, my mother said. Her voice broke, a jagged sound in the quiet room. and for the first time in my entire life, they weren't looking at him. They were looking at me. The silence that followed was different from the silence of my childhood. Back then, the silence was dismissive. This silence was pleading. It was the sound of a family realizing the foundation they had built was made of sand. My brother wouldn't meet my eyes. He kept his hands clawed together in his lap, fidgeting with a nervous energy that made my skin crawl. Finally, my father cleared his throat. It was a dry, rasping sound. "Your brother made some bad decisions," he said, choosing each word as if he were walking across broken glass. "Financial ones. Large ones." I almost laughed. The irony was so thick it was almost poetic. The golden child, the standard of excellence, the one who was exactly what they wanted, had fallen. And he hadn't just tripped, he had cratered. My mother stepped forward, her hands reaching out but not quite touching me. "He trusted the wrong people," she whispered. "He lost a lot of money. Their money, our money. We've tried to fix it. We've tried to cover the gaps, but—" She trailed off, her eyes searching mine for a mercy I wasn't sure I had left. "We can't. We're at the end." I nodded slowly, letting the weight of the moment settle. The same people who once measured my worth against his perfection were now standing in the ruins of that perfection, asking me, the not exactly child, to pick up the pieces. I took a slow, deep breath, feeling the power in the room shift like a physical tide. "Do you remember his graduation?" I asked. My voice was quiet, steady, and devoid of the anger I thought I would feel. My mother's face twisted. My father looked away, his jaw tightening. "The day you told a room full of people that I wasn't something to be proud of," I continued. "The day you made a joke out of my existence to make his look brighter." No one answered. My brother glanced up, looking confused, as if he were hearing about this for the very first time. He probably was. To him, it was just another day of being celebrated. To me, it was the day I stopped belonging to them. 6 years, I said, 6 years of total silence, not a single phone call to see if I was alive. Not a message to see if I was hungry or cold. You didn't care where I was when I had nothing, and now you only care where I am because you have nothing. Every word landed like a stone in a still pond. My mother's eyes filled with tears that finally spilled over. "We made mistakes," she whispered. "We know that now. We were wrong." I looked at my brother. For the first time, he didn't look like a standard. He didn't look like a monument. He looked human. He looked broken. He looked like a little boy who had finally realized the world doesn't give you trophies just for showing up. "I'm not here to fix everything," I said. The room went deathly still. "I'm not your safety net. I'm not the backup plan you get to pull out of the closet when your first choice fails." The hope that had been flickering in my mother's eyes started to die. My father's shoulders slumped even further. I let the silence hang there for a beat longer than was comfortable. I wanted them to feel the weight of it. I wanted them to understand that the person standing in their living room wasn't the boy who left. "But I will help," I added. Their heads snapped up. A mixture of relief and uncertainty washed over their faces. "On my terms," I said. I didn't rush the decision. For years, I had lived my life as a reaction to their expectations, a reaction to their comparisons, a reaction to their crushing silence. This time, for the first time in my life, I was the one making the rules. "I'll help you," I said, looking my brother directly in the eyes. "But not the way you think. I'm not just going to hand over a check and let you go back to pretending this didn't happen. I'm not going to bail you out so you can stay the golden boy while I remain the shadow." They leaned forward, desperate for the lifeline. "I won't give you the money," I said. "I will pay the debts directly, and in exchange, I'm taking over the finances of this family. Every cent that comes in and every cent that goes out goes through me. I will guide you and I will show you how to rebuild, but you are going to do the work. You are going to learn what it feels like to earn your own life, just like I did." My brother swallowed hard. I could see the pride warring with the desperation in his eyes. He looked at our parents, then back at me. "Okay," he whispered. It was the first time I had ever heard a crack in his voice. It was the first time he sounded unsure of himself. My father exhaled a long, shaky breath. He looked like he didn't know whether to feel relieved or utterly ashamed. My mother wiped her face with the back of her hand. "Thank you," she breathed. I didn't say, "You're welcome." I didn't hug them. I didn't offer a platitude. Instead, I stood up and looked around the room. The same walls were there, the same furniture I had grown up with. But the house felt different now. It didn't feel like a temple dedicated to my brother's greatness. It felt like a house. Just a house. One more thing, I said as I moved toward the door. They all looked at me, caught in the gravity of my voice. We start over. Completely. No more comparisons. No more expectations of who is better or who is the standard. No more pretending the last 6 years didn't happen. If we move forward, we do it honestly. We do it as people who actually know each other, not as characters in a story you made up. They nodded quickly, maybe out of genuine guilt, maybe out of the sheer terror of losing the only person who could save them. It didn't matter which one it was. The contract was signed. Over the next few months, I kept my word. I didn't make it easy for them. I sat across from my brother every weekend and made him look at the numbers. I made him account for every mistake. No shortcuts, no rescues. And slowly, a strange thing happened. He changed. He didn't turn back into the perfect version of himself that my parents used to worship. He turned into someone better. He turned into someone real. Someone who understood the weight of responsibility. My parents changed too. It started in small ways. They started listening more and talking less. They stopped bringing up the past. They tried, even if they were imperfect at it, to see me for who I actually was, rather than who I wasn't. But the biggest change wasn't in them, it was in me. I realized that for my entire life, I had been holding my breath, waiting for them to tell me I was good enough. I had been running a race I could never win because the finish line kept moving. But sitting in that living room, directing the recovery of the people who had once discarded me, I realized I didn't need their validation anymore. I didn't need the trophy or the standing ovation. Vindication is a cold meal, but it's the only thing that truly satisfies a starving soul. For the first time in my life, I felt something I never thought I'd find in that house. It wasn't pride, it wasn't the thrill of winning, it was just peace. The kind of peace that only comes when you realize that your worth was never theirs to define in the first place. We all have a past we're trying to outrun. If you found a piece of your own story in mine, hit that like button and subscribe. Maybe we can navigate the silence together. Would you like me to tell you what happened the first time my brother actually had to work a job he hated to pay me back?